Hello everyone, thank you for tuning into another video. There is a huge patch expected tomorrow for EU with the arrival of 10.0.5, and with it comes a lot of talent tree reworks, overhauls, class tuning, buffs, nerfs, you name it, it's coming, and it's very exciting stuff. So I thought it would be a good idea to kind of get an update on that tier list that I released previously and give you guys my thoughts on what I expect to perform best and what I think also to perform not so great. With that being said, thank you for tuning in again. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's get right into this one. So first up, we've got Frost Death Knight. Um, I don't I don't think this spec is gonna move too much. It's still in quite a niche position, um, with it being limited to quite only a few number of comps like Windwalker DK, for example, which does perform pretty well once piloted properly. But honestly, it is competing with its counterpart Unholy, which is, I think, the more well-rounded and competitive spec at the moment. Um, you still have great burst every minute with this spec, and defensively you're still quite sound. But it's just a thing where you're like, why don't I just play Unholy? Just based on that, I'm gonna place this in a B for now. Um, moving on to Unholy. It did see some damage output nerfs and some nerfs to spell warding. If you didn't know, it got nerfed in two parts. So the first part was where the actual absorb shield is now absorbing less, and the second part was that where the casting speed reduction that you would apply to anything attacking you has been reduced as well. You did see a bit of a buff to Death Strike, and honestly, this spec is still looking quite competitive out of the two builds. So based on that, I'm gonna put Unholy in an A. Up next, we've got DH, and this spec did get nerfed recently to Essence Break and a few other things, which we expected to kind of lower the power of Demon Hunter quite a bit. But it still feels like Demon Hunter still does what it does best, which is just damage, damage, and more damage. It still does that very, very well. It still does great damage. Defensively feels still quite tanky. I think the only time that you can really shut down a DH completely is when they are locked down in stuns. Besides that, they do feel quite durable. Um, and with the nerfs to other melee classes that it was competing with recently, I believe DH deserves a place in the S tier for this upcoming patch, of course. Um, Next up, we've got Balanced Druid. I don't expect this spec to see much change, even though they did buff some of your damage. They did buff some consistent damage for the spec, and to counteract that, they did nerf some of your 2 and 4 set bonuses to kind of balance things out. So honestly, I don't think this spec will really change too much, and this based on that, I'm gonna put this. I want to say a D, but I'll put it in C for now, and we can come back to this later if we decide to change our minds. Um, Next up, we've got Feral. It did recently see a nerf to some of its damage. Its bleeds, rake, rip, and frenzied. Feral frenzy. Sorry. It did also see some nerfs to its passive well, not passive. Its durability in the form of frenzied regen. It got reduced by 33%, I believe. So it did get hit a little bit with those nerfs. However, I still think that the spec will perform pretty well. It still has its 2 and 4 set bonus to rely on, which does counteract those rake and rip nerfs as an AOE build. So a single target, I think it will definitely see a little bit of a decrease, but when it comes to AoE, I think that 2 and 4 set will be its saving grace. but even outside damage is still quite a durable spec with bark skin on a minute cooldown and your wall, and you still have access to frenzied regen, proc, and the actual spell where you have to press it. So based on that, I'm gonna give this spec put this spec, sorry, up into the A tier. Um, and then we'll move on to Devastation Evoker. Um, this spec is in a little bit of a weird spot right now, as it is seeing some consistent damage buffs, but it is seeing nerfs to its one shot. The thing with the meta right now is that you either have to end games quickly, or kind of live long enough to 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 not die. And unfortunately, it doesn't really do either of that. Um, or it won't be doing either of that after the nerfs. It definitely can do some insane damage right now, but with some nerfs to its one-shot capability coming up in 10.5, I believe this spec will struggle to see some performance. I still think it can do some great damage, but I think based on that, and just the way that it's designed is the way that it's designed at the moment. I'm gonna put this in the middle of the pack along with Frost DK. Um, Next up, we've got BM Hunter. This spec has a lot of damage. When I say it is just consistently coming in, I mean it. With and that number only goes up with the introduction of its 2 and 4 set. You will just see um, a lot of BM hunters, I believe, will kind of come out the woodwork once they realize, hey, this spec is kind of OP. Probably jungle will be a very popular comp that you see on ladder queuing up, and I believe defensively, this is the only weak point of this spec where it's not very durable. Um, it can get trained down pretty easily and doesn't have very ways to mitigate damage. All it has is aspect of the turtle, which is your immunity, and then you have your wall on a 3 minute cooldown, which honestly doesn't do much. And then obviously you have your heal as well. So open to being trained, lots of damage. I still think BM can do very well. It just needs a bit of support on his weaknesses. But with that being said, I'm gonna put BM in an A. I would say it's the best of the hunter specs. It's looking to be the best of the hunter specs going into 10.0.5. Next up, we've got survival. This spec, same as BM, it does a lot of damage. Obviously, not as much as BM, not consistently either. But with its four set bonuses, you will notice that its damage will be incredible. It escaped somehow any nerfs or significant changes in these notes, so it's looking to be very good. It did also get changed to, well, all hunter specs got on change to raw sacrifice, redirecting less damage to the pet once they've used that spell. So that's always a good thing to hear. As a hunter, you don't really like to see your pet dead on the floor, so that's always a good thing to see. With that being said, I'm gonna put survival along with BM in A tier. It's obviously not as good, so I'll put it a little bit lower, and we'll move on to MM. Now, this spec got hit very hard. One simple thing they removed made the spec go from a very popular hunter spec to probably not going to see much play, and that is with the removal of double tap. Double tap is gone as of tomorrow on EU. I'm not sure if it's live on NA just yet. Somebody can let me know. But as of tomorrow on EU, hunters will not have double tap, and this spec really did rely on just simply setting up and doing a fat go on somebody and just taking them out completely with a double tap rapid fire. And now that it's gone, it feels like this spec will not be able to compete offensively, and it has the problem that the other 200 specs have, which is its survivability. It can be very easily trained, and it feels like it will just be a liability going in, and therefore I feel like MM will be I would say around a D or C tier. I would say a C tier. I don't want to be too unfair. Maybe they can make it work. They are seeing some buffs to rapid fire and true shot, so maybe those buffs can help make them a little bit more competitive offensively. But we'll have to wait and see for that one. Um, Next up, we've got Arcane Mage. This spec has been very, very good throughout Dragonflight. It has some very, very high burst. It is very sound defensively. It all around it's quite a very good class. I would say the biggest thing is that in this upcoming patch they are targeting your execute, so that will be a little bit less effective. I still think people would take the talent to make that Arcane Barrage hit harder on targets below 35%, but it won't be as potent as before. It's still bringing in a lot of mobility, utility, and just overall slipperiness, being very hard to stick on. So I feel like this spec will still perform very, very well. Therefore, I will put this one up in the A tier. Obviously, just to let you guys know, just make sure that you're grouping all the melee with the melee and the casters with the casters. So just because Unholy is above Arcane like this doesn't mean Unholy is this many times better. It's just obviously group melee with melee and casters with casters. Just wanted that to be said. Um, Moving on to fire. Fire has it's. I don't think fire has a problem with burst. Fire's burst is very good. With combustion, it can really just 100 people very quickly. There are specs with meteor that kind of increase that burst exponentially and make it even more potent. But fire has that same problem it's always had, where it feels like a combust bot. It has received some recent buffs, to its damage, to pyroblast, to fire, phoenix flames, fire blast, just trying to make it a bit more competitive outside of its cooldowns. But it still feels a little bit awkward, as you do have to kind of cast. You can't purely rely on your fire blast and phoenix charges to do that, to do damage. Sorry, outside of combust. So that does feel like it's holding the spec back a little bit, as well as it's defensively not as great as its counterparts Frost and Arcane, which are both a little bit more tankier. Frost with its two blocks, and Arcane just generally being so slippery and hard to catch up to. So with that being said, I'm gonna put fire in a C tier as well. I would say it's better than Boomkin and MM, so I'll put it up at the top. Uh, Next up, we've got Frost. Frost Mage has some very good consistent damage. And with the meta kind of slowing down a little bit, or with the devs trying to slow down the meta a little bit, I feel like this will only benefit Frost, as it can drag games out a lot, and it's also very, very good at shutting down a lot of the melee comps that you see nowadays. And I feel like the meta is a lot. There's a lot of melee out there. So if you can have a spec on your team that can help shut down melee and deter them from, even coming out off a pillar, then that would be very, very valuable. I mean, just based on those two things alone, I feel like Frost would be quite a decent place in this upcoming meta. It's very sound defensively, but I think it does require a bit of a slower paced meta to kind of thrive and perform at its max potential. So therefore, I'll put it into a B. Maybe we see things get better once the patch actually hits, but I think B is a fair place to put this for the time being. Um, and then we'll move on to Windwalker. Windwalker is overall quite a good spec, I would say. With the addition of its set bonuses, it can do some amazing burst. It has very great one shot potential. And from what I'm seeing, is they have a very good consistent damage. Not like they were back in Shadowlands with them being just a 1 minute one shot bot that just try to live until the next leg sweep. they can actually do something outside of their cooldowns, which feels quite nice. A very welcome change for the spec. I would say the only thing that you have to worry about, or the only thing holding it back, is its defensive capability. It is quite prone to being just shut down and just falls over at times. So I would say that is the only thing holding it back. But I would still say overall the spec is at a very good place right now. It just performs pretty well in the right hands. So I would say this spec is going to be probably a high A, I would say for sure. Um, in the right hands, of course. Next up, we've got Ret Paladin. Now, if you're a Ret player, you were very upset to see the most recent changes to your one shot. Honestly, we can all agree this spec did deserve a little bit of tuning, as no one enjoyed being on the floor just passively because a Ret Paladin popped all his cooldowns and just hit you through all your defensive cooldowns, and then you're on the floor. No one had fun with that. I'm glad they targeted it. I'm glad it was tuned, but unfortunately, that was your only saving grace as a Ret Paladin, where you could just one shot somebody and put them on the floor very quickly, and with very little counterplay. Um, just because as a class you were just so squishy, you were just so defensively vulnerable. So unfortunately, with those changes, with your one shot not being as potent and you still being as squishy as you were before, even with that Shield of Vengeance buff going from 1.5 minutes to 1 minute, I still think Ret is going to be in a very, very dire state in this upcoming patch. Therefore, I'm going to put it down with Fire, Boomy, and MM down in C. Um, I would say obviously it's one of the better, or it's not really a melee class, but I would say it's about, yeah, about there should be fine for Paladins. Um, Next up is Shadow Priest. Now, Shadow Priest is still looking pretty good, despite a whole round of nerfs to its damage, its survivability. Um, it's still looking like a very, very good contender for this upcoming patch. It's very powerful, especially with an Asa Rogue or really any spec that can just run people over, like a Warrior or a Windwalker. Um, just with that alone, I'm tempted to put it up into an into S, but I don't think just because of its lack of flexibility, um, just the fact that it can't really play with as many comms as it used to because of the recent nerfs. I'm gonna put this spec up into the A tier. I would say it's I would say it just because of its utility, it may be above Arcane. It has a lot more utility just to help out its team. It doesn't have a spammable CC. It does have life swap. It does have grip. It does have powered shield, and obviously you can toss out some heals here and there. That may help as well. But I'll say based on utility, I'll leave it like this. Next up, we've got assassination rogues. Now, if you're an Asa rogue and you read the latest patch notes, you're very happy. Somehow you escaped nerfs in this patch. I don't know how. You guys got incredibly lucky. Um, but it's looking to be the top dog of this upcoming patch. It completely runs people over at the moment, and that is without its four piece. I'm pretty sure not many rogues at the moment have four piece, and once they do, they will see so much a huge increase in damage. It will be very hard to keep up with this spec. The only hindrance that they have, unfortunately, is they are open to being trained. They do have evasion, they do have disarm, they do have cloak, they do have vanish. But these things, you go through that quite quickly. Unfortunately, as Asa, if you're being targeted. So once it's gone, you just kind of fall over unless your healer can kind of carry the game defensively in that manner. But with those buffs, I mean, with the current state that Asa is, with his four piece, with the introduction also of its there's a new talent or PvP talent that it got where it corrodes everybody in a certain radius, and anyone who's caught by that, when you press shift, sorry, it applies garrote to people in a radius, and increases the damage of bleeds by 20%. So with that as well, I think assassination will join DH up in the S tier. I think it might be the best spec in the game, honestly. Just with the state that it's in at the moment, and it's only going to get better as things go on. Next up, we've got Outlaw. This spec is quite well rounded. It does good damage. It's very sound defensively. You have CDR and very essential spells. It does require a bit of a slower meta to kind of perform at its peak performance. But that is looking like the direction that Blizzard is taking the game with these changes, especially with the gladiators distinction change, the trinket set bonus, nerfing the primary stat and buffing the stamina. I think that that's the direction they want the game to be pushed in. So hopefully, if the game does, I mean, if you're an outlaw rogue, you're praying for a slower meta, and that would be the prime condition for this spec to kind of thrive. With your set bonus, you do even more insane, crazy damage. But unfortunately, you are competing with assassination, which is just the better spec, unfortunately. With that being said, I'm gonna put this spec middle of the pack again, in the B tier. I think it is better than Frost DK. I would I would say overall it's better than Frost DK. So I'll put it right there. And next up we have Subtlety Rogue. Now we saw Sub perform pretty well in the recent AWC Cup. And honestly, it does feel quite reliant on on secret techniquing somebody in a go where you're bombing or you're dueling, which feels quite cheesy. It feels like you can't reliably do anything without secret technique. Either that or you're relying a lot on your partner's damage and you turn into a stun bot. On top of that, it does provide a lot of control for its team, which does help. But it's quite difficult to pilot and climb, as it just lacks overall damage, which the meta does require at the moment. So it's pretty rough for this spec. I'm not going to lie, especially if you're playing solo queue or something that's not very coordinated. So just based on that, I think Sub is gonna go into the B tier. I would say something around here, maybe. Yeah, something around there would be fine, I believe. And then we've got Ellie Shaman. Now Ellie got nerfed a little bit with in the most recent patch changes, but I don't think that it's gonna be enough to really hold the spec back. It still is gonna do a lot of damage, especially once they get their hands on their set bonus. You'll be seeing some massive earth shocks. You just wait and see. The only thing that Ellie is lacking right now is a bit of defensive capabilities. They are just open and prone to being ran down and trained, which does hurt the spec a little bit. But obviously, with support from his team members, with his healer, with the second DPS, they can make things work very well. And honestly, just the sheer throughput for the damage can really deter people from even coming off a pillar, and trying to create their own pressure. So honestly, I think Ellie, just based on the damage it does, and the fact that it's really not getting touched that much, I think this spec is still going to be an S tier spec, based on what we're seeing at the moment and what's going to be changed. Next up, we've got Enhance. What do I even say about this one? This spec is still kind of in the dirt a little bit. You're getting some, I believe you're getting some healing buffs, but it's not really what you needed. Damage still seems to be the core issue with enhancement. Before you were hitting people with like 100 and something K Ellie Blast and Lightning Bolts, and that just isn't the case right now, and you're kind of sad about that. And on top of that, you are quite open to being trained and ran down. You don't have many options to kite and get away from people. You do have very nice healing, self-healing and off-healing for your team, but I don't think that is enough to kind of keep you out of the C tier, which I think this spec deserves to be in. I would say it's definitely above MM going into this patch, so we'll put it around there. moving on to Athlete. Now, the thing to note with Athlete is that the spec really does thrive off longer games and dampening. Those two factors, um, not alone, but those two factors do impact the spec quite a lot. And the game is seeming to shift into a slower, less bursty meta, which does benefit Athlete quite a bit. On top of that, is quite a defensively sound spec, with very great defenses in the form of Dark Pact and Wall, and also they have a lot of potent self healing. If you can play the class very well. For example, I've been watching Tagsy. If you guys don't know him, you should check him out on Twitch. He's a very good athlete warlock one trick, and honestly, he plays with Snoopy sometimes and double DPS twos, and he lives for so long. It's quite impressive how much self healing that they can throughput. But it feels like the only thing holding them back is the current state of certain healers that are looking to be quite good in Dragonflight. I mean, in 10.0.5, sorry. And that seems to be the only thing that's kind of holding them back, as their damage can easily be counteracted by for example evokers. They have a lot of hots and can very easily top a team and keep them healthy and offensive, and Athlete doesn't feel as good into those particular healers. So honestly, I still think it's a very good spec. It's just kind of a coin flip in terms of matchups. So just based on that, I'm gonna put this in a low A, I believe. I think that's a fair spot. A fair spot, sorry, for Athlete to be in. Um, Next up, we have Demolock. Now, Demo still provides some great damage, even though it's seen some nerfs in recent patches. It brings an MS effect to a team. It brings more control. It's still quite defensively sound, even probably more so than some of its counterparts. And the fact that it can kind of end games just based off that control is pretty impressive as well. Um, its damage will be obviously higher than Athlete, but I still believe it's not going to be as potent. So I'm going to say it's still going to be A tier, but I think it's still going to be a little bit under Athlete, somewhere about there. Um, Moving on to Destrolox. Um, I believe generally speaking, all the Warlock specs are quite similar and quite close to each other in terms of capability. Um, with Destro, you'll be doing some more consistent damage than Athlete and Demo, but you have less CC than Demo, for example. So it's like whatever spec you play, there's gonna be some kind of pro and some kind of con from playing it. But it does have more potential to end games with a bit of more burst capability than the other two specs. So just based on that, I'm gonna put this in A as well, but I'm gonna put it higher than the other two specs. Um, Arms. Now, Arms Warrior is interesting because it receives some buffs to damage. It got some reverses to nerfs on destons and PvP. And also it is getting ignore pain back. Now I think the state of Arm, like generally speaking, Arm is looking very good. It does really good damage. The only part about it is like that it doesn't have great survivability. Now with the addition of ignore pain, this is the condition for the spec to see if it's going to be great or meh. So we'll have to wait and see how good ignore pain is before kind of deciding this. But I feel like going into 10.0.5, Arms is going to be very solid. I'm going to say it's going to be an A tier above. I won't say it's above Windwalker. I think it is above DK though, and with the feral nerfs, maybe above that too. I think I think maybe there. I think maybe like this would be fair for. Yeah, I think that would be fair for Arms, honestly. And then last but not least, Fury. Fury Warrior it's a weird time to be a Fury Warrior. The spec is still quite durable. It has a lot of self healing, a lot of passive tankiness. You can use your wall in stuns, and that does help quite a lot for the spec. But it did receive some buffs. Sorry, in the recent patch, you saw some buffs to execute, some buffs to bloodthirst, and some other key abilities, which overall does help the spec do a bit more damage, but the thing is that it's hard for that damage to kind of matter and impact the game because of the slaughterhouse buff. Nerf, sorry. They did buff slaughterhouse, however, by 4 seconds, the duration of the debuff that applies to players. But I don't think that will be that I mean, it helps. It does help for sure. So there is potential for the spec to perform, but again, I think we'll have to wait and see how well those buffs will impact the spec once the patch actually lands. For now, I think it will be fair to put this spec into B, probably somewhere around here. And I think that'll be fair. I think that will complete the tier list. So yeah, a lot of stuff to cover. A lot of changes are coming. It's been so great and exciting to cover this. Honestly, the amount of stuff that I learned doing this kind of stuff is amazing. And really and truly, I do enjoy the fact that Blizzard are pumping out changes so consistently and pretty accurately as well. So kudos to Blizzard. We as a player base, I can say safely, are really appreciating these changes and really hope that they keep up this pace. But yeah, thank you for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.